Tonight we're in Watford, and welcome to Question Time. So the first question time of the new year, and whether you're watching or listening at home, welcome to our audience here, and of course to our panel. Tonight, the Liberal Democrat Business Secretary Vince Cable, Labour's Shadow Health Minister Liz Kendall, the former Conservative Shadow Home Secretary David Davis, now a leading voice on the backbenches, the broadcaster and columnist Julia Hartley-Brewer, and the man who created Wikipedia, the website used so much that to wiki has become an English verb, Jimmy Wales. And just a reminder, as if you needed it, that you can, of course, debate either by text or Twitter, which, with everything that's said here in this studio. Our hashtag BBCQT, you can follow us at BBC Question Time, you can text comments to 83981 and use the red button to see what others are saying. Our first question is from Andrew Burgess, please.
Is there any way to stop the type of attack that happened in France?
Is there any way to stop the type of attack that happened in France? David Davis.
I'm afraid the short answer is no. In a free society, people are going to be able to get around, move in an unfettered way, and make the sort of monstrous surprise attack we all saw in the last couple of days. And actually, it's not just in a free society. If you look at places like Russia, where they've got massive controls on the population, you still have the Chechen terrorist attacks happening there. So the answer is no, and I think the first thing to say is that we should recognise that what we shouldn't do is react to them in the belief that we can stop them. The simple truth is that they are trying to do a number of things. Create a monstrosity that will attract everybody's attention, dominate the headlines and so on. And they're trying to make us behave in a certain way. Us behave in a way which is alien to our culture. Give up our freedoms, give up habeas corpus, give up privacy, give up the sorts of things that people desperately do to try to stop this sort of attack. And I'm afraid the terrible answer is no. Doesn't mean we can't defeat them in other ways, defeat their ideology, defeat their ideas, defeat their barbarian approach. But to make any country completely safe is beyond the reach of any government.
And do you think in any way publishers should modify what they publish?
No, not for one. I mean, if I'd been able to orchestrate one reaction to yesterday, I would have wanted every single editor in every newspaper in Europe and the rest of the world to agree to carry their cartoons that day. Because you can see, I mean, in the Twitter sphere and the commentary that's going on in the background to this, people saying we mustn't be chilled out of this, we mustn't be frightened of this, but people also saying, but if we do it, we'll put ourselves at the front of the queue to be killed. Now, I think that it's really, really important we stand together. I think it's really, really important that when we say we stand shoulder to shoulder with the French, we mean it and we show it in what we do.
All right. The person there in the middle here, yes, you, sir.
I'm a Muslim. I'm really very angry about not many Muslims out there speaking, because it's really shocking what happened yesterday, and I think more Muslims need to come out and condemn what happened. You can't have a small community represent 2 billion people in this world. It's very important all Muslims come out and condemn what happened.
Julia Hartley-Brewer.
I agree wholeheartedly with David on if only the newspapers had not bottled it, which is what they did today. And I understand why they bottled it. That would be part of the way of stopping future attacks having an effect, because as David says, we're not going to stop. There will always be some nutters who are going to try and kill people, and sometimes they're going to succeed. And in a way, in a free society where people can walk into offices freely and into shopping centres, it is an extraordinary thing in this day and age that we haven't seen more atrocities and greater atrocities, and that's some small mercy. But I think we have to accept the fact that we are allowing these attacks to actually affect us. And so while we can't prevent them, we need to prevent them from actually affecting us. Because the only reason I'm not wearing a T-shirt today with the Prophet Muhammad in a cartoon on it is because I don't want to be killed. I've got a daughter and I want to stay alive for her, and I'm scared. And the reason why all the newspaper editors didn't do what David suggested is because they're scared they'll be murdered, they're scared their staff will be murdered, and their families will be murdered. And this isn't about respect for a religion. This is fear of religious fundamentalists. And we need to stop letting that fear affect us. And we should all publish these cartoons, because you know why? It's not about offending people who have a particular faith. I don't think anyone wants to do that. The point is, though, the right to exercise your freedom of belief, your freedom of religion in a democracy is not the opposite of the freedom to speak freely or to offend. It's hand in hand with that. Those freedoms come together in a democracy. And in this democracy, we have a history of allowing people to offend, of satirising the powerful, of satirising religion. Remember Life of Brian? That's what we do in this country. And people who don't like that, people who don't think that should be acceptable, and there is a large proportion of the population of Muslims in this country. I think a poll in 2006 after the Danish cartoons events back in 2005 found that 78% of British Muslims think it should be a criminal offence to blaspheme about Prophet Muhammad. Now, that's not the same as they're saying people should be allowed to kill people, of course not. But it shouldn't be an offence. We have the right to offend in this country, and you have the right to be offended, but not to stop people offending you. And we need to stand up for that. And if we don't stand up for that, we will see our freedoms ebb away very, very quickly.
Woman with the spectacles there, yes.
How can we say that Britain is defending democracy and freedom of speech when somebody like Theresa May is proposing to stunt freedom of movement by confiscating suspected jihadist passports?
Do you want to answer that, Ms. Cable?
I don't think you can link those two things at all, actually. I mean, on the broader issue of the response to this crisis, I completely agree with what's been said already. I think probably the best thing that was said about this whole issue was the French writer Voltaire said the thing that we should be most intolerant of is intolerance. And intolerance really of two kinds. There is the kind displayed by these fanatics, and we must utterly, completely condemn it in the way that the other panellists have done. But I think we've got to be careful also that we don't have intolerance now directed at the Muslim community. And I think the comments made by the gentleman in the audience, the Muslim gentleman, were both brave and right. One of the things which I think we tended to overlook is the day before these atrocities, there were people marching in the streets of Germany, in cities where there were no Muslims at all, condemning Islamicization of Europe. So, you know, this intolerance could come from both directions. And it's worth remembering, I think, that the worst terrorist atrocities, they do include attacks by Islamic fanatics. We've had them in London, we had them in New York. But we also, the worst individual atrocity was that man Anders Breivik, a neo-Nazi in Norway, and we had the Oklahoma bombers in the US, another neo-Nazi group. So the terror fanaticism comes from different directions. So we've got to be very, very careful not to allow intolerance of one kind to now seep over in the opposite direction.
And, yeah, it also... When you say terrorism comes from different directions, it also raises, I suppose, the question whether these jihadists were actually attacking Charlie Hebdo because of the image of Muhammad, or whether it was a route into creating more mayhem, recruiting people, whether the actual offence was caused by what they printed, or whether they were looking for a target that they could exploit.
But every terrorist group in history have always wanted to make the state respond in a way which causes a feeling of repression and which actually recruits people to their cause. That's what they're trying to do. And this was picked as a target to try and provoke the French government to do that. And I think they'll resist it. I hope they'll resist it, as the Norwegians resisted it completely. And they just shrugged it off and said, we're not going to put up with this, we're not going to...
But one of the things we have to be really clear about is that there is no excuse, there is no, provocation and no reason for this attack. We must be very, very clear about that. And I am extremely proud to represent a very diverse city, Leicester, and I know that Muslims in my constituency and my community do condemn this atrocity. And let me just come back to Andrew's point about whether there is any way to stop attacks like what we've seen in France. And I would say that we must think right now of the police in France who are risking their lives to try and find the perpetrators to stop them from committing other atrocities. We will never be able to guarantee that they won't happen, but let us not forget the police who are out there at this moment risking their lives doing it. And I think that the only way that we can show solidarity with France and across the rest of Europe is to remember how hard fought for our freedoms are. And this shows that freedom of speech and freedom of expression is something very dear and fundamental to us. And Salman Rushdie, you know, who's been through all of the kind of all of this, a threat and fear himself, said yesterday that, and this is difficult for many people, but that religion, like any other idea, should be criticised, satirised, and yes, shown our fearless disrespect too. That is what is hard fought for. It's difficult for people, but that is what it means to stand up for freedom of speech.
All right,
and democracy.
I think I wouldn't be. I wouldn't be doing my duty if I didn't read this out from BBC editorial guidelines. You ought to know in the light of what you said. Political, religious and topical sensitivities. It says due care and consideration must be made regarding the use of religious symbols in images which may cause offence. And it goes on, the Prophet Muhammad must not be represented in any shape or form. That is a BBC guideline.
I think that's absolutely outrageous.
Yeah, you should.
What do you think?
I think that, you know, the BBC is different from Charlie Hebdo, but I think that there is nothing in what those cartoons did that in any way justifies what the violence that we have seen. And freedom of speech and expression is difficult. I don't do certain things. I'm a politician. I'm not a humorist, a cartoonist, or any of those things. But I think it's really important that we defend people's right to say things which many of us find uncomfortable. You know, we have a proud history in this country of satire, of cartoons, right, and TV programmes and Monty Python and Spitting Image. This stuff is uncomfortable, but that is what freedom of speech means. I really believe that.
Yeah, so I just have two basic points to make. So first, on Wikipedia, we do publish the cover of Charlie Hebdo, the one from 2011 that led to the firebombing. We don't have any of the recent cartoons, but I think that's just a matter of time. And I think that's really important because in particular when we have this kind of a controversy, it's important, particularly after the fact, for people to be able to go and see these cartoons, to really understand the issue. You really have to know what was published, what was the response. All those kinds of things are really important. It's a fundamental piece of trying to understand the future is to publish these kinds of things. And so while I think the BBC guideline that you just read out is actually perfectly fine for a normal routine use for the BBC. It's a very conservative news organization. At a moment like this, it's more important for the public's right to know, to actually have an open discussion on the issue. Can
I challenge that? I mean, I agree that the BBC should perhaps not set out to upset people. But the BBC is not just a broadcast organisation anymore. It's also a huge internet presence. And it's incredibly important that, for example, trying to find out what Charlie Hebdo is about, they should be able to go on the BBC website and find it. And the simple truth is 65% of people's news now comes from the BBC. And if it's laundered in the way that that sounds like it's laundered, then that really is a serious reflection on the so-called freedom of speech in Britain.
It's currently taken the French forces over 24 hours to find these men. Would you feel confident that if something like that was happening in Britain, they'd be found in a shorter period of time and more would be done about it?
Well, you don't think the French
they said that the CCTV or the things that they have in France aren't up to the levels that they have in the UK.
Yeah.
So maybe the fact that potentially would if it was happening in Britain, would they be found short in a short period of time?
You were Shadow Home Secretary. What do you think of
I think we much of a muchness, frankly, we'd find them just as quickly. I mean, the problem they have now, just practically, is that they are in a huge forest. and I assume quite a lot of technological activities going on to try and find them in that huge forest overnight. And that will be exactly the same in France as it is here. The GIGN, who are doing this, they're not actually normal policemen. The GIGN are the equivalent of the SAS in these terms. And they'll find them, and there'll be an outcome.
OK, let's just take a couple more points from members of the audience. There's a hand up there, but I can't see who it belongs to. Oh, you, sir, yes.
Hi, it seems to me that Liz Kendall's point about Salman Rushdie is really important, and that political beliefs and religious beliefs are sort of on the same spectrum, and that if you can scrutinise, let's say, a radical communist or a radical fascist,
Absolutely.
then why should a radical Islamist or a radical Christian preacher, for that matter, why should they be able to avoid that same level of scrutiny?
All right, and the woman over there on the gangway.
I applaud free speech, but I do think we need to see the negative side of actually being disrespectful to religion, is that the reduction of religion in society leads to a vacuum, and that actually can be part of the problem of increasing fundamentalism in this country and across Europe.
In what sense do you mean? That if people scoff at religion, it diminishes religion?
I think that's part of the issue. I think that's obviously not the only problem, but there is a place, obviously, for religion in society. And I think where the vacuum created, where there is a lack of religion, a lot of people have a desire for it, but then that comes out in fundamentalism.
In our history, we've had ferocious debates about religion. Just south of my old constituency, Epworth, where Methodism basically started, where the Wesleys were. The Wesley rectory was burnt down during the development of Methodism. So you know, these fierce debates have taken place. They've been part of the creation of our culture. The idea that religion cannot stand up to a degree of mockery and a degree of disagreement is ridiculous. Such a religion would not be a proper religion, full stop.
Okay. Well, maybe I can take up cudgels on your behalf to get a bit of balance into this. I mean, we're all being a bit pious here and saying we passionately believe in freedom of speech, and we do, and that's the issue here. But we don't actually have in this country or in Europe freedom of speech. We have freedom of speech within the law. I mean, this country, you cannot incite racial violence. In many European countries, you cannot deny the Holocaust, rightly. We have libel laws. You know, there is an important principle that is being defended here by the panel and the audience, which is the right to do satire, to insult other people. That is, but there are many other respects in which we do not allow freedom of speech. You can't go into a cinema for a joke and shout fire. You know, a classic test of freedom of speech. We restrict freedom of speech in certain areas. So
but more fruitful to compare it with freedom of speech in the United States, which is far more extensive than it is in this
but I
country,
think where you were right at the back was to stress you do have to have a balance, and societies like ours do have a balance. We have freedom of speech within the law, not without restriction.
Right. I think we'd better go on, because we've... thank you very much. We've got many, many questions to go through. Just before our next one, come and join us for the next question time if you'd like, or the one after that. We're going to be in Lincoln next week, and then we're at Eastleigh in Hampshire the week after that. The details there are on the screen. I'll give them again at the end, but Lincoln next week and Eastleigh the week after. All right, let's go on to a question from Jim Reeves, please.
Right. Is David Cameron just using the Green Party to avoid the televised debates?
This is the announcement today that David Cameron... David Cameron says unless the Green Party is included, and they're excluded at the moment, he's not going to take part in the debates. Jimmy Wales.
Well, the last time I was on Question Time, one of the questions that came around was David Cameron's promising to have the greenest government in history, and I was asked if that was true or not, and I said, of course, I have absolutely no idea. But now I see it actually is true. Turns out he's a massive supporter of the Greens, and that's what it's all about.
Says nothing to do with avoiding debate.
Of course not. No. How could it possibly?
Julia Hartley-Brewer.
I'm going to try and get this right. We now seem to be having a debate about the debate between political leaders over which political leaders should get to debate in the leaders' debates. I think that is a fair summary of the situation. I think the word is frit, isn't it? I think that's what David Cameron is. It's not in his interest to have a leaders' debate. It's in the other party leaders' interest. That's why he doesn't want one. And yes, he's using the Greens. It's a good excuse. But I don't like the idea of politicians dictating who voters get to hear debate. I think that should be up to the voters, or Ofcom, who made this decision that UKIP should be involved and not the Greens. And I think if David Cameron says he doesn't want to debate, I think they should go ahead with the debate and use the "have I got news for you" trick and put a tub of lard in place, or perhaps a nice little bowl of Eton mess. And if he doesn't want to debate, that's fine, but there will be an empty seat.
Right. All right. David Davis.
Oh, heaven.
It's an easy question.
Heaven forfend that he's trying to avoid debate. I mean, it's an easy bluff to call anyway. They just have the Green on, full stop. I mean, they're going to have, presumably going to have UKIP anyway. So they've already got 4.
But then if you have the Greens, what about the SNP? What about
regional special interests and all that?
Well, what the Prime Minister actually said was, I think you've got to have the parties that are represented in the House of Commons. He cited the Greens. You can't have one minor party without having another minor one. SNP, UUP, Plaid Cymru, Respect, George Galloway, he's a party in the House of Commons. Where does it stop? In other words, is this just a smokescreen to say, actually, I don't want to debate, thank you very much?
The debate will get very interesting if you let George Galloway in as well.
Certainly would.
Well, interesting is one way of putting it.
but do you think he's trying to avoid it?
I think all Prime Ministers try to control the agenda, particularly when, of course, they've got to defend the agenda. But I think, as I say, if he says the Greens, let's get the Greens in, let's do it. I tell you what I can't see. I cannot see us ever having a general election in this country again without a leaders' debate. That simply, in my view, is
You say that like it's a good thing.
Is it? Well, I do think it's a good... I mean, there are goods and bads to it. I mean...
You've been in 2 of them, haven't you, for the leadership of your party?
I've had 5 debates with Mr Cameron and 1 or 2 on your programme. But I can't imagine us ever having a general election without a debate. There are drawbacks to it. It does suck the life out of the rest of the campaign. I mean, basically, you simply have the debates and little else. But I cannot imagine it. We can ever not have a debate. Be impossible. Be impossible.
So your advice to him would be, or to the broadcasters, or to the other parties, accept Cameron wants the Greens there.
Get the Greens in.
Get them in. And the SNP?
No, I wouldn't go so far, but I think the Greens...
Liz Kendall.
Jim, is David Cameron...
What?
Sorry?
What are the Liberals being there?
Jim, is David Cameron using the Green Party to avoid the debates? Yes, he is. He should be confident enough to go out and defend his record and confident enough about his plans for the future. And I don't think he is. The broadcasters...
How can you believe that he's trying to avoid a debate? That's the most childish thing I've heard.
Well, why
Seriously.
hasn't he agreed to it?
I'm a woman of your intelligence to say David Cameron is trying to avoid a debate by insisting the Greens be there.
So, I'm sorry, sir,
but... He wants the Greens there to show how fair he is.
Oh, really? A very generous voter. I think he is frightened about having those debates, and he shouldn't be. The broadcasters have put forward a number of their proposals, and I think we should agree to them.
All right. And Vince Cable, what is your view?
Well, I think he is trying to use it, but we are still in a coalition government, and I will therefore try to defend him, even if nobody else is willing to do it. The reasons he's given, actually, were not his own personal preferences. What happened today was that a regulator called Ofcom decided which parties should be in debates and which shouldn't. And they used a metric. They measured the share of public opinion polls, local elections, European elections, number of MPs, and they concluded, not David Cameron, they concluded that this qualified UKIP, as well as my own party and the Tories and Labour, but not the Greens. That was their judgment, not his. So, although I suspect his motives, he was relying on the judgment of an independent regulator.
Vince, if he'd really wanted to do the debates, why didn't he just say yes?
Well, fine. I mean, I think the simple principle is that if you have a substantial segment of opinion, and clearly the Greens do, they should be part of that debate. We shouldn't be trying to suppress it.
Nick Clegg sent a tweet to David Cameron. Did you read that today? No. Come on, David Cameron. The broadcasters have invited us. The public expected. Just say yes and stop making excuses. So you're a stouter defender of the Conservative Prime Minister.
Well, he did say the coalition's only just in.
I know, but he's certainly put his... The woman there with the spotted dress.
He's using the Greens. Why do you think that he's using the Greens? Is he using them tactically because he's scared of the threat of UKIP?
Well,
that's what he said,
you put your
didn't he?
finger on it.
That's what he said.
Well, he said that he wanted the Green Party to be there because UKIP were going to hurt him, and it wasn't fair if Labour weren't going to get hurt with the Green Party.
Yeah, he didn't say that on the record, did he?
It was in the newspaper today. It was in the Evening Standard. I read it on the way here.
Yeah. Oh, in the Evening Standard.
It was in the, it said hurt. He said it would hurt.
And does that make sense to you to do that?
What, me?
Yeah.
No, does it make sense to that tactic of saying it's unfair to have UKIP and not the Greens?
Can I just come back to one of the points that Vince said about...
You'd like to have the Greens there, wouldn't you, really?
If the broadcasters want the Greens there, that's fine by me. You know, so who was it said that the leaders' debate sucked the lifeblood out of the campaign? I think it was David. Now, I don't really agree with that. I think it's really important we've got the leaders' debates now. It's a good thing and they should always be there. But I think there's all sorts of other debates going on, and I mean, Jimmy will know this better than anybody else. I'm constantly involved in debates online. I've been at a big public meeting today down in Gloucester, big debates there. Yes, if you're just obsessed with the Westminster world and the TV debates, that's one thing, but there are huge debates going on around the rest of the country, and I think the responsibility is on us to find lots of different ways of engaging with people, because it's not just all about the national television these days. Yeah.
It was only back in April the Prime Minister said, I've always believed these debates need to happen. It's good for democracy. It's good to see. So anyway, yes.
I absolutely agree with David Cameron that he's saying he's not going to attend these debates unless the Greens are there. The reason being is, in this country now, our political system is less and less 3 or 2 main parties, and we now have some of these other parties on the periphery creeping in and gaining support. And it's absolutely right that their leaders of those parties that are out there that are going to be winning votes have the right on national television to debate the key issues with the Prime Minister, and he can defend himself against these disillusioned voters that are moving away from the main parties.
I think I have a solution. And maybe we could...
Everybody here will be very pleased.
Well, I think particularly something like Question Time, that maybe we have a knockout competition from all the smaller parties working their way through to get to a final. And then you'd have it all on television. It would be so exciting.
I love it.
Someone call Simon
new form of
Cowell.
election, that's
yes.
for sure.
Strictly come dancing. Yes. Strictly come dancing.
That's more days' work for you.
Well, I wouldn't be against that. Let's go on to another question. This from Maureen Kennedy, please.
After serving his sentence for rape, should footballer Ched Evans be given a chance to continue with his career?
And the news today, of course, was that though he was about to be signed, the football team decided not to because of public opinion. So, and at the same time, he has now apologised, which many people would seem to be calling for before, with a statement saying, I wholeheartedly apologise for the effects that night in Rill has had on many people, at least the woman, not least the woman concerned. Liz Kendall.
I was appalled, really, that Oldham was even considering taking him on. Actually, he's a convicted rapist, and you know, I think that this is a high-profile job, a highly paid job. It is a job that has, you know, a role model for young men, and I think that was, you know, I was appalled by it, and so I'm glad that they've taken a different decision. And I'm also really disappointed. I think the FA should have taken, have said something about this and taken a much stronger role. I think there is still far too much of a kind of casual attitude about rape and violence against women. We shouldn't forget only 7% of reported rapes end up in a conviction. And I think that this attitude has got to change, and I'm glad that they've taken the decision that they have, because I think it would have been wrong.
So so it's not enough to serve 2.5 years. He should lose his job.
Well, actually, there's a whole other issue about whether 2.5 years for convicted
has served
rape
2.5 years. It's not
is
the
wrong.
debate.
Now, I believe that people who've committed crimes should, you know, have a second chance and a chance for rehabilitation, but not in this high-profile, highly paid, highly remunerated, respected role.
Julia?
At the risk of being drummed out of the sisterhood, I couldn't disagree more. There are three issues here. One is, should someone convicted of a serious crime be allowed to go into employment afterwards, after they're released from prison? It seems to me the obvious exception of jobs where trust and safety is involved, so care homes, teachers, doctors, lawyers, accountants, then actually the answer is yes. Ched Evans' sentence was, although he only served 2.5 years, was 5 years behind bars, not a lifetime of unemployment. The second issue seems to be that, well, it's a well-paid, high-profile job, and therefore he shouldn't be allowed to carry on doing that. Well, unfortunately, that is his job. It's probably the only thing he can do other than shacking shelves at Poundland, and he's got an entitlement in a free country to ply his trade. And bearing in mind that a number of other footballers have actually returned to work after doing things like killing people through dangerous driving, racism, and other sex offences. The other question is whether or not, if he apologised and if he said what he did was wrong and he showed remorse and didn't just say he was sorry for the effects of the events of that night, then he would have done the correct sort of Oprah Winfrey style apology, and therefore he'd be allowed to return to work. But he doesn't believe he committed a crime. And I have to say, having looked at the case in great detail, and again, sorry sisterhood, but let's say the truth, if I was on that jury on what I have read in a lot of detail of that case and the appeals, I would not have convicted him. I think that if we're going to go around convicting drunk men for having drunken sex with drunk women who don't remember, we are going to be imprisoning a hell of a lot of young men. And I think we are in a situation where we need to face up to the fact that we have a low rate of conviction for rape, because a lot of these situations are, just like this, a he said, a she said. And in the event of doubt, we cannot convict. I think this is the rule of the mob, and he should be allowed to return to work, and he should be allowed to get on with his life.
Just not there at the back.
You say Oldham shouldn't have employed him, but as Julie just said, he denies that this rape ever took place. But also, you say that what he did is bad. You look at the people who didn't want Oldham to sign him. They've threatened Oldham's staff. They've threatened the families of staff who work there, saying that they know where they live. They're going to go and rape their 5-year-old children. Surely that's worse than what he did, something he denies. And if he apologises, then surely that's showing that he's guilty.
No, he hasn't apologised for raping.
He apologised for the effect that it's had. But if he apologised for the rape, which is what everyone wants him to do, isn't that showing that he's guilty?
Liz, just come back on that, because he is added a statement tonight complaining of mob rule tactics that led to him not getting his job back, which comes to the point that she was making.
But I also understand that the victim, the woman involved, has also faced threats of violence, which is completely unacceptable. And whatever either Julia or others of the audience think about what they've read about the trial, a jury convicted him.
All right. David Davis.
Before I answer the substantive question, I do disagree with people demanding an apology from him, because at the moment his case is going through a criminal review, and I think there is an issue there that you demand people sort of confess and apologise when the case is still subject to a review, which appears to be. It's the CCRB, whatever they call it. So that's by the by. The issue in terms of the case, I started off really in Julia's position. I start off with a presumption, when somebody's committed a criminal offence, whatever it is, including murder, once they've served their sentence, that's it. But then I thought a bit longer about it, and actually, of course, that's not true for an awful lot of offences. I mean, for example, if you commit a fraud, it'd be pretty hard to go back to a job as a lawyer or an accountant. Frankly, if you commit a number of offences, it's quite hard to go back to a job as a doctor. And if you commit a sex offence, it's pretty hard to go back to a public arena job at all, where you are a role model. I mean, it's very hard to imagine somebody who'd been convicted of rape going back to be an MP, for example, be a broadcaster. And so there is a big dimension to this, and I'm afraid at the end of the day, there are some offences that do destroy careers, and they destroy careers for a reason. And I think this is one of those. So I started out from Julia's position, but the more I thought about it, the more I thought, actually, it's harsh, but it's necessary. And I'm afraid I don't think he should appear in the public arena ever again, unless he's exonerated.
You, sir.
I think the comment by Julia is nonsensical. We have an independent, I agree with David Davis, we have an independent judicial system, which is a competent judicial system. What you're suggesting is actually trial by media. You say that you wouldn't have convicted him. That's an absolute nonsense. We need to respect our independent judiciary. Actually, what we need, I agree with David Davis, what we need is actually a rule, similar to governing bodies for solicitors and other professions. There needs to be a consistent policy for the FA to come out and say that those convicted of serious offences should not be allowed to return to the profession as a footballer.
All right. And of course, the reason it isn't the case is there's too much money in it. You know, you can get struck off as a doctor, you can get struck off as a lawyer. I don't think anybody's ever been struck off as a footballer.
Right. There were a number of people with hands up who feel he should be allowed to go back to football. Can I hear from one of them? No, there was a man in the front here. No, you, sir? No? You, sir, yes.
I was going to use the example of the footballer who killed, while driving, killed 2 people, and he's back playing football. Now, surely that, however you look at it, killing people is worse than raping someone.
Can I just come back on that? But that is why I think we do need to see some action from the FA on this, because they are the governing body.
Retrospectively.
But as a governing body, I think that they need to set some guidelines for this, and I'm disappointed that they haven't done anything about that. And that's
the man at the very back there on the gangway.
I'm a season ticket holder at a Premier League football club and have 2 young children who I'd like to take to see that football club play in the future, and I'd find it very difficult to convince them that it's right that they should be cheering on someone who's committed the crime that Ched Evans has been found guilty of committing.
Jimmy Wells.
Yeah, I mean, I would say as a consumer, as a viewer, I would stop supporting a team if they hired someone like this. And I also think, yeah, it's a shame if your career is ruined because you've been convicted of some horrible crime. It's not that big a shame if you committed rape. I'm not really that bothered by it. I will say, of course, it's how long will it take? Another year until the judicial review is done. If his name is cleared at that time,
it's all different.
It's very different, right? But I think we've got to wait. There's no rush here. Okay. I mean, maybe for him there's a rush. There's
the woman there.
Sell-by dates coming.
No, behind you.
Me.
Yes, you.
Sorry. What I don't understand is, so is it then okay for him to have a job in Sainsbury's? So is it all right for people in Sainsbury's who work in Sainsbury's to be around a rapist because they earn less money? Does that mean it's all right for them to be around it? That's what I don't understand.
Yeah, what I would say
and is it our place to take justice into our own hands? We have, not that I think the justice system is very good because it doesn't rehabilitate people at all, just makes them have a really crap time. Is it our place to put justice? Is it our place to take justice into our own hands?
His punishment was, I mean, I accept the jury's verdict, by the way, to the gentleman who said that earlier. I'm saying that on what I've read, reading through the appeals and all of I consider it to be a logical impossibility for the lady to have been not drunk enough to consent to sex with the first footballer and 5 minutes later too drunk to consent to sex with the second. I think it's a logical impossibility for one to be guilty and the other to be not guilty. But the point is, why do we think that footballers are role models? Why do we think that because someone can kick a ball around that they have some sort of moral
but then
role
why
in
is it
our
all right for them to
society?
go and work somewhere else? Why is it all right?
Hold on, let's hear from the member of the audience again. Yes. Go on.
Me?
No, you were talking.
Oh, me?
Yes.
Sorry.
Go on, finish
No, but
the
why
point.
is it okay for them to get a different job? Or why do we take it into our own hands, what job they get, who they work with, whatever? If we have a justice system, then we just have to put that into their hands because we as, like the public, that's not our job. We have people that do it for us.
Vince Cable.
Well, the audience has obviously got very mixed feelings about this, and I agree with David. I have too. I mean, some of us remember the days of capital punishment, and there were people who protested their innocence, having been found guilty by a jury, and were executed and were subsequently found to be innocent. So we need to be very, very careful about just accepting as the final word something that's come through a court. But I think in this particular case, I mean, there are so many factors around it. I mean, this gentleman hasn't actually served his sentence. He's on licence. He has sort of apologised, rather in a qualified way, this afternoon. There is the issue, and there is the issue that Liz raised, which is quite right, that the victim has been treated in an utterly appalling way by this man's fan club. So I think when you look at all those factors together, I do come down on the view that he shouldn't be treated leniently in this case. But how do you deal with it in the general sense? I think the answer has been several people on the panel have made, is that you treat the Football Association in the same way that you treat the medical profession, the teaching profession, elsewhere. They should have standards, and those standards should be observed, and there are offences, and it could be rape, it could be killing somebody when you're drunk, which disqualify you from future practising your profession, because footballers are not just icons, they're not just in the public eye, they're enormously well paid, of course, next to bankers. So let's have professional standards and professional discipline.
Sorry, what were you saying?
Why does it make it okay for them to go and get a less paid job? So the people who get less money, is it all right? Oh, it's all right for them to be around a rapist. You know, because they get less money, that means that they should be around, you know, people that do hurt people.
The issue here is about...
Yeah, about it being idolised. I understand that.
It is, and that
but then I still don't understand why a lower job...
Are you worried about the casual attitude about violence towards women in many different forms?
Yes,
because
I am,
I really
But she's saying, what jobs could he take?
No.
Which is going to put him...
I'm saying that
hold on.
Sorry.
Answer her question. She's saying, as I understand it, that if he is convicted, loses his appeal, what job should he be allowed to do? If he can't be a footballer, why should he be allowed to go and work at Sainsbury's as a convicted
He could be an MP.
Exactly.
He could be in the House of Lords. That would be perfectly fine if he was a hereditary peer, or you know, that would be fine.
Yeah, but let's take the more simple point. Why should he be allowed to work anywhere? And what should he be allowed to do, in your view?
Well, I think that this is not an issue about, you know, that it's all right for people on low pay to be around rapists or not. This is a point about this man would be a role model for young men, giving a message that you can still have the life and the profile and the success and all the adulation, even though you have committed a crime and can be convicted by a jury. And I think that is an additional issue to take into consideration.
Okay, I think we'll move on in a moment. Let's take the man with the striped pullover on there, at the back. Second row from the back. Yes.
I understand teachers and doctors, they have a position where the public trust them. Whereas footballers, they are footballers, they're just sports people. No one trusts them, no responsibility, no one depends on them.
But people do still look up to them, don't they?
They're on the media, but I don't think that's why they've gone into football. When doctors go into their profession, they go in there to, you know, to treat people, and they have trust of children, elderly, everyone. Whereas footballers are just there to play footballer. It's the media that gives them that platform. The media should be looked into. Why are they giving this guy so much of a platform?
Oh, right, OK. And a last point from you, sir, yeah.
I think the one thing you've got to take into consideration was that if Rolf Harris wants to come back to TV, taking your point, you're saying then that Rolf Harris should be allowed to come back to television and broadcast, even though he's been convicted as a paedophile.
If someone wanted to watch him, then I suppose that might happen, but I don't think anyone wants to watch him.
Yeah, but then why would somebody... Yeah, but why would somebody... You're saying rape is something that is not that bad.
No, I'm not.
In the fact that
categorically not saying that.
Yeah, but what you're saying is that you can say that I can watch a footballer and my children can idolise a footballer who's raped a woman, who's legally been arrested and charged for rape. So on that same argument, I could say that my children, or the BBC, whoever wants to, could employ Rolf Harris and have the same person on television.
The reality is, through most of the 70s, 80s and 90s, we were watching rapists and paedophiles on our television screens half of the bloody time. Right. Now we know who they are, and a lot of them have gone behind bars.
A last point from the woman in the third row there, in the spotted dress.
Yes.
Yes. What about the two of you? Yeah, go on.
I was just going to...
You start and then you carry on, and then we'll move on.
OK. I was just going to kind of agree with most of you, really. I actually think that it's, particularly back to what Julia was saying, I think it's a matter of demand. I think I'm not forgiving what he did whatsoever, but I honestly think that if a brain surgeon had done exactly the same thing, a brain surgeon is heavily in demand, and he wouldn't necessarily be allowed to come back to work, but you need a brain surgeon. I'm not saying you don't need a footballer, but I think that's part of the reason a brain surgeon will be in demand. You need a brain surgeon. You don't necessarily
All right,
need
and the woman on your right.
I just think what Julia said is kind of awful. Let's just mention that conviction rate rates for rape at 7%, and this person has been actually convicted guilty, and you're saying publicly you don't believe her, and that is why people don't come forward, and that is why people don't get convicted, right?
The jury didn't believe her. The jury found one of her claims of rape to be untrue.
He got convicted guilty. He's one of the 7%.
One of the two defendants she claimed raped her. Well, she has no memory of the incident, by the way. She doesn't know whether she was... The whole case rests on the fact that she doesn't remember anything, and that she was in no position to give consent or not give consent. We have no idea.
The woman on my right here. Yes.
Essentially, the difference between Ched Evans and a brain surgeon or someone that works in Sainsbury's is that young people are going to have posters of this man all over their walls. And this is a person that has committed a serious crime, and this is being considered okay, and it's not.
OK. I think we'll move on. Thank you very much. We'll move on to another question. This is from Mark Quilfelt, please. Mark Quilfelt.
Yeah, who's to blame for A&E waiting times? The government, the NHS, or the general public?
Oh, you have three choices. Who's to blame? NHS, government, or the public? God help them. Vince Cable.
Well, I don't think blame in any of those categories is sensible. I mean, we just look at the cause, what's happened, why has this happened? I mean, it's happened because there is massively increasing demand in A&E wards. That's for good reasons and bad reasons. I mean, the good reasons is that, you know, more and more people are having, you know, we've got an older population, they need attention. I think we've got 1.3 million more people going to A&E wards than in 2010. So there's a genuine increase in demand. At the same time, the GP contract system has failed very badly. As a result, a lot of people who would normally go to a GP can't get appointments. They turn up at an accident and emergency ward. Very bad use of resources, very inefficient. And, you know, there are certain sort of big problems that the hospitals are trying to deal with, where there's a lot of their patients are suffering, you know, frail elderly people, and many of them suffering from dementia. And the hospitals simply can't cope with them. They can't get them out into the community, the so-called bed blocking problem, because local social services departments can't handle them. And so the whole system backs up back into the accident and emergency wards. It is very serious in certain areas. In most parts of the country, the targets are being met, but in some parts of the country, there is a genuine crisis. And we've got to deal with it through a mixture of ways, you know, short-term ways. They do need money. They do need resource, of course. And in the long term, we've got to try to make sure that with an ageing population making more and more demands on hospitals, we help to deal with people in the community, and also we make sure that the people don't go into hospital when they don't need to, because far too many are at the moment.
I did AS Economics last year. I didn't do overly well, but a basic principle that we learned, and I'd like to thank you for helping me learn some of the stuff I actually did in the end. But, a basic principle is that monopolies create inefficiencies. Now, I'm all for healthcare being free at the point of service, at the point of delivery, and I'm all for free healthcare. But what do you suggest we can actually do to overcome this inefficiency? We've tried the PFI companies, that's what they're called, if I'm right. That didn't work. What can you suggest that gets over this issue of monopolies causing the inefficiency? Because the NHS is a monopoly unless you want to spend heinous amounts of money on private healthcare.
Jimmy Wales, since you're his mentor, you better answer them.
No, it's a great time for me to come in. So certainly I wouldn't say you can blame the general public for getting sick. That's just what happens. And I don't think you can really blame the NHS, because ultimately the structure and the budget of the healthcare... sorry. You can't really blame the NHS.
A&E for you, I think.
Yes, straight to the A&E. The structure and budget of the NHS is not the responsibility of the NHS itself, but the government. I would lay the blame, per what my Wikipedia-educated economist friend here has asked, on politicians, not the government, all of them. What I see in debates about the NHS far too often are beating each other up about, is it ring-fenced, is it not ring-fenced, is the budget high enough, is the budget too high, etc., etc. And what I'd love to see is the politicians set aside their differences, address real reforms, address real funding needs in the real places where it's needed, and be much more technocratic about the whole thing.
But how would you, as a matter of interest, if you, for instance, thought there was a certain £8 billion we here talked about as a figure, how would you expect to get political parties with different views on taxation, with different views on the distribution of wealth, to agree? It sounds a fantasy, doesn't it? Aren't they doing their job by arguing about it?
But I do think that we could all do a better job of that. I do think, of course, we're always going to have political debates. You know, when someone says the NHS is a monopoly, therefore there's problems, and then someone says, well, let's privatize part of it, and everybody freaks out. It's like, okay, let's stop being so religious about these debates and be much more practical about these debates. And yeah, there's no magic bullet, there's no simple answer, but there are answers.
All right, Liz Kendall, less religious, more practical.
Listen, if you are faced with an ageing population and a huge increase in the number of people with long-term conditions like diabetes and heart disease, you don't, or obesity, you do not cut the home care services which help keep elderly people at home, so that we have got 500,000 fewer elderly and disabled people getting those services. You do not cut the district and community nurses who help people with diabetes or COPD manage their conditions. You do not cut nurse training places by 7,000, piling up problems for the future, meaning that the NHS is spending millions more on agency nurses and now recruiting many more staff from overseas. And you do not distract the entire system for 3 years with a massive, pointless reorganisation. There are very real challenges, and I do not apologise for holding the government to account for its actions, as the opposition should, but also setting out how we think we can have a long-term plan to renew the NHS in future by joining up health and social care, shifting the focus towards prevention so that people get the support they need to stay living at home and not ending up in hospital, which is worse for them and costs the taxpayer more.
David Davis.
Well, I can understand the request for blame. If I'd been kept waiting for 4 hours in an A&E, I would want to blame somebody too. But actually, you don't solve this problem by a political spat. I could sit here and tell you, oh, after the ridiculously badly negotiated GP contract of 2004, the use of A&E went up from 15 million a year to 22 million, which is what happened. But that doesn't solve the problem. The man who's just taken over the running of the NHS is actually an ex-Labour special advisor called Simon Stevens. And he wrote a report before he was given the job saying, from his perspective, that the improvements in the NHS, both in the last 5 years and actually in the last 15 years, have been spectacular. It's pretty much the only health service in the world that's managed to cope with the pressures as well as it has. Now, that's the good part of it. The difficult part, I mean, some of it, Liz is right about. There's a real problem of coordination of elderly people in beds with social services. No doubt about that. It's very expensive to solve. We're going to put about 5 million into it, and there's an integration programme starting in April and May. You know, we have to deal with the fact that 350,000 more people above the age of 75 than there were 3 or 4 years ago. So these are hard things to do, but they will be done, and they are being done. So I don't think that, as I said, this is best solved by a political spat. Of course, you know, God save me, we're 5 days into this election campaign. God help me in 5 months' time. But this is what is done. This is one of the effects. Well, let me finish, Liz. This is one of the effects of this election campaign. What are we doing? We're now playing a game with the health service, something we absolutely shouldn't do. We've got a very good health service. We're doing as good a job as we can of dealing with very, very difficult pressures. And frankly, that's the most important thing to worry about.
And who's playing this game? You're not playing this game?
Well, I mean, this week, this is what we had. You know, there's all these phrases about weaponising the health service.
Sorry, so we're playing a game, you mean they're playing a game?
The reason why the NHS is on the front pages of all the newspapers and leading the news, you know, I'd love it if we just clicked our fingers and we made that happen. The reason it's happening is the reality. And let me just say one thing. When we left government, this was 6 years after the GP contract had been signed, 98% of people were being seen in A&E.
You didn't even count the numbers by the week then.
All right, the man there in the second row.
You should do your figures properly.
You, sir.
Hiya. My mother was a nurse for 30 years. She started in the 80s. She worked her way through my childhood in the 90s and the early noughties. She saw firsthand how terrible the NHS was under Thatcher and how terrible it was under Major. I spent quite a lot of my childhood visiting her at the hospital and saw the improvements of the last Labour government. In the last year alone, A&E waiting times in Watford, in this town, have doubled. Now, there is no doubt in my mind that the money that your government has spent, Vince, and your government, David, on a pointless reorganisation could have been used on nurses. There is no doubt in my mind that there's £7 billion of taxes you want to give away to the middle classes can be spent on nurses. There's no doubt in my mind that taxing the bankers who cause this economic crisis can be used to save the NHS.
All right. Julia Hartley-Brewer. What? He's a Labour councillor.
That's right.
We couldn't tell. Julia Hartley-Brewer.
Well, the question of Mark asked you, who's to blame, government, NHS managers or the public? And I would say all three. The public, we're partly to blame because we're getting older, but we're also getting fatter and we're also getting more drunk more often. And this does create problems. And we're going to A&E when we don't need to go to A&E. But part of that is the government's problem because we have a contract, the GP contract, and as the daughter of an NHS GP who benefited from working fewer hours and getting paid more, I know it's true, that actually for most of the working week, well, most of the week, from Monday to Sunday, GP surgeries aren't open. Even if your surgery is open, you know, Monday to Friday, it's not open at night, it's not open in the evenings, it's not open at weekends. So people need to get to see a doctor. If my daughter has got a raging temperature or I suspect something is wrong with her, I'm not going to go, well, I'll wait till Monday morning and call the GP at 8 o'clock. I'm going to take her to A&E and stuff any politician who tells me I'm not supposed to do that. But it's also down to NHS managers who've been chasing ridiculous targets. So when the government does actually put in a target that is sensible, they fiddle it and mix with it and they do stupid things. But it's also down to politicians, this total abject failure of joined-up thinking. I agree with a lot of what Liz has said, and I think that Andy Burnham, the Shadow Health Secretary's idea about joining together the budgets of the NHS and social care in the community is absolutely vital because we have local authorities with their budgets being cut. They cut the care in the community. That saves a few £100. That elderly lady then ends up in hospital. She can't leave hospital because there's nowhere to go and there's no one to look after her. And so she sits in a bed she doesn't need to be in for weeks on end, costing the NHS thousands of pounds. So the local authorities saved a few hundred, but the NHS has spent an extra few thousand and another person is waiting for a bed, and that does not make sense.
This is exactly what I mean by a more technocratic approach. This is not a philosophical debate about the role of the state in healthcare. This is just practical management issues that are broken and need to be fixed.
Okay, the man there with the pink tie. Yes, you.
Our NHS is too precious to become your political football. The facts are quite clear. In a country whose average age, life expectancy, is now 82, combined with a cut in social care for the elderly and for the disabled, why are you surprised our NHS is in chaos?
Okay. What's your solution to it? You've heard what Jimmy Wales says about it should be made virtually non-political. The man behind you is waving at me. You, sir, last point.
Yes, I think if I was to ask this audience, who do they trust more, the medical professionals or the politicians, they would say the medical professions. And I think that Jimmy is right that they should stop this political football before the general election, get together with the medical professions and work the way forward.
All right. Thank you very much. I would say some hope, but anyway, our hour is up now, so we have to stop. Next week, we're going to be in Lincoln with Douglas Alexander for Labour, Anna Soubry for the Tories, the historian David Starkey, and the journalist Mehdi Hassan, among those on the panel. The week after that, we're going to be in Eastleigh, as I said. And if you want to be in the audience, either Lincoln or Eastleigh, there's the address on the screen. And you can telephone us, 0330 123 9988. Now, if you've been listening on Radio 5 Live, welcome back to this series of Question Times. The debate, as you know, continues with Question Time Extra Time, so I hope you enjoy that. Meantime, here, my thanks to our panel and to our audience. From Watford until next Thursday night, from Question Time. Good night.
Much more to come. Stay with us. Andrew Neil celebrates satire looking back at That Was the Week That Was on This Week, next on BBC One, with guests Richard Bacon joining Diane Abbott and Michael Putillo.
"800 years ago,
There's nothing much to mark the spot of one of the most famous